Okay, we're recording. Let me just close that out of the way. Okay, I'm sorry. I keep getting. I'm gonna have to turn my. Whoever is instant messaging me, stop because it keeps popping up. Okay. All right. Thank you very much, people, for attending this webinar on academic resiliency while we manage the COVID crisis and staying at home and all those things such as shelter in place and figuring out how to move your face-to-face classroom to an online environment. And for many of you, that is a new concept for you, and it's probably very stressful, just adding to the stress of COVID. So today, that's why we have invited, as a district, to have you speak, or I'm sorry, to have Dr. Aubrey, as well as Dr. Breisig speak to you guys about how you can manage that stress during this very difficult time. Just brief introductions and bios on each of our guests today. Dr. Thomas Aubrey is the Director of Behavioral Health Sciences and a professor at Glendale Community College. He is also adjunct professor at Northern Arizona University in Flagstaff. Dr. Aubrey has a master's degree in marriage and family therapy. He obtained his doctorate in behavioral health, integrated behavioral medicine from Arizona State University, and is currently working on a second doctorate in cognitive psychology. A little editorial, as if one doctorate wasn't difficult enough, he's going to do a second one. So, Dr. Lynn Michi Breisig, did I say that name correctly? I think.
Good job.
Okay, is faculty member and counselor at Glendale Community College. Dr. Breisig has been a counselor for more than 30 years and has taught and counseled in community colleges, universities, and a small women's college. She is committed to facilitating several growth and goal achievements, as well as resilience in individuals and communities. In addition to her many years in higher education, Lynn has also served 2 years as the program director at the Cancer Support Community of Arizona. Her passions include helping people in transition, spending time with friends and family, cooking, running, hiking, walking, and enjoying the great outdoors. Her motto comes from the 12th century mystic Hildegard of Bingen. I'm not sure, sorry. All shall be well. And my apologies, I'm going to go back to Dr. Aubrey's bio. I skipped a whole entire paragraph between the two introductions. So just one briefly to go back to cover that. Dr. Aubrey is also the author of the textbook, The Resilient Learner, Thriving and Succeeding in College, and co-author of several other textbooks. Dr. Aubrey has more than 15 years of diverse experience in behavioral health care, including trauma treatment, crisis stabilization, marital counseling, career and academic counseling, and integrated behavioral medicine for the treatment of comorbid behavioral and medical conditions. Welcome both of our guests today to talk to you about academic resiliency. I will now turn the session over to both of our guests, and they will proceed with their program. Thank you.
Thank you, George, for the introduction. And so I also want to thank all the participants who are joining with us. It's still growing. It looks like we have 72 currently at this moment, and folks are still logging in. But thank you for joining us this evening, taking time from your busy schedule. But it really shows the interest, and it really acknowledges that you guys know that there is an importance to build health and wellness. And when we say health and wellness, this includes building good mental health. And that's an element, unfortunately, that's forgotten, particularly in higher education. We forget that mental health is the key cornerstone, is the foundation to success. Because without good mental health, it's really challenging, or your health, physical health, starts to deteriorate. But it's also challenging to become successful without good mental health. Because without good mental health, It's hard to attend classes, to participate in classes, to do homework assignments. It makes it very challenging to persist and become successful and graduate at the community college, at the university, or even in high school, for that matter. Without good mental health, it becomes challenging to become successful in work. Without good mental health, it is an uphill battle with relationships. It's exhausting in relationships without good mental health. So you can see mental health is really the key cornerstone for success in all areas of life. And how do we build mental health? Really, that's what Dr. Bryzik and myself are going to talk about, is building psychological and emotional resiliency. And particularly, how do we manage our stress during this COVID-19 pandemic? So we'll talk about how do we then build good mental health? How do we develop those resiliency to maintain good mental health so we can become successful despite adversity, despite setbacks? And it's quite interesting. If you take a look at the first slide, a good friend of mine sent me this quote from Tupac. And I won't read it for you, just some of you have already probably read it, but if you take a quick glance at it, and it really speaks to what academic resiliency or just psychological and emotional resiliency represents. So Tupac was very poetic in this sense. I don't know exactly what he meant by the details, but for me, when it talks about damaged petals, my thought, the first thing that comes to mind is all the past painful experiences that we go through in our life, and we bring those experiences into the current moment, and it starts intruding into the present moment and impacting our ability to become successful. Those are, to me, what all the damaged petals are. But yet, despite those, and then all of a sudden it talks about the concrete really probably represents the stressful and the moments currently in our life, the adversity. For example, COVID-19, that can represent the concrete. Yet despite experiencing stressors or traumatic stressors in the current moment, despite encountering painful past experiences, we can still be the rose that flourishes, that grows, as mentioned in Tupac's poem. So that, to me, really represents what academic resiliency represents. We're taking the skills of psychological and emotional resiliency and applying it into the academic setting. How do we help students become successful despite what they've encountered in their past and despite what they're encountering in the present? And with that, there are three key points that we're going to point out in our presentation. We're going to talk about the stress or the patterns of stress activation. So Dr. Bryzik is going to walk us through what happens in the end in the brain and in the body when we get stressed out. In the end, my hope and my goal is that you understand, one, stress is normal. And as you'll understand, this activation is just a process of the body to protect us. But it's when we enter in a state of chronic activation that it becomes potentially dangerous or can impact our success. So Dr. Bryzik will walk us through what happens in the brain when we have this chronic activation occurring. But more importantly, we want to then go into the psychological and emotional resiliency. And my hope is that by the end of the presentation, you'll have at least 2 skills to help mitigate the effects of chronic activation of the body's stress response system. And then, of course, we don't want to leave you alone on this path to building and strengthening your resiliency skills. So we will be providing you with resources to walk you along this journey and to let you know that you're not alone in this process. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hand over the presentation, I would say the platform, but this webinar presentation over to Dr. Bryzik, who's going to talk about or discuss patterns of stress activation.
Thank you, Dr. Aubrey. So welcome. I'll add my welcome to everybody too. I am glad that you're taking this time to be with us today. And I'm very honored to be presenting on resiliency with Dr. Aubrey, who is a renowned expert in the field. And resiliency is something that I'm quite committed to as well. As Dr. Aubrey said, I'll be talking about the next couple of slides, but I invite Dr. Aubrey to chime in if he has another example or story to share. So we'll go to the next slide. And here I want to remind us that humans are wired to survive and to seek pleasure. And we're going to be talking about the survival instinct in this webinar. Hans Selye, back in the mid-1900s, identified stress as adapting to change. Right now, we're in the midst of a lot of change academically, at home, at work. The way we go about our day-to-day lives has changed in the midst of this COVID-19 pandemic. Those changes have the potential of activating our stress response. If our survival is threatened, or just the perception of our survival is threatened, we might go in, we'll respond. And usually that response goes in one of two ways, either hyper or hypo arousal. You might have heard of the fight or flight response, and you may have even heard of the fight, flight, or freeze response. We'll be talking a little bit about those. The hyper arousal state, fight or flight state, you can see emotionally we become frustrated, angry, anxious, overwhelmed. Classic example of that is road rage. Somebody feels somehow threatened because somebody cut in front of them, and they become frustrated, angry, anxious, overwhelmed because of that perception that somehow or other they're feeling threatened. On the other hand, somebody might respond in a hypo-aroused state or an under-arousal state. You might think of that, some examples of that might be stepping into a math class. If you don't like math, you step into the math class, you might become distracted. You might find that you zone out a lot. Or if a teacher calls on you in class to respond to a question, and if that's not a comfortable place for you to be, if you feel somehow threatened, you might freeze, you might become numb. Some people, that happens with test anxiety. If you get a test, you might have prepared well, you know the material, but then you get that paper in front of you and you might become hypo-aroused. You might freeze or become numb. That's a state of feeling threatened, and your stress activation kicks in. Where we want to be, though, is in that window of tolerance. It's the optimal zone of arousal where we're able to manage and thrive in our everyday lives. And in that window, that's when we're clear-headed. We are able to use our higher level thinking, and that enhances our learning when we're in that space. Everybody's window of tolerance is different, and people generally are more able to remain within the window of tolerance when they feel safe and supported. So that's what Dr. Aubrey and I want for you, is to be able to help you to stay in that window of tolerance despite the many stressors that may be surrounding you. So let's move to that next slide. I'm trying to do that on my home computer too, so that I can see my notes. Okay. So we'd like to hear from you by having you write into the chat, what are some of your stress activators? And you can also add, if you want to, if you go, which direction you go, to the fight or the freeze direction. So please go ahead and write in the chat. And George was going to be looking at some of those for us too, so we might hear from him about what he's seeing.
Someone that says nursing school says they freeze. That's all I have right now for a response.
Okay, so we'll let you just think about those a bit, and then we'll move to the next slide. And here we're going to look at that stress activation, especially with the chronic stress that Dr. Aubrey mentioned before, and that we're really pretty much in the midst of now. With chronic stress activation, our thinking starts to deteriorate. So, starting from the right in that neocortex step, that's where we're in that window of tolerance. That's where we do our best thinking. We're able to do abstract thinking. We're able to reflect on where we are now, what's happened in the past, future possibilities. We're able to do critical thinking in that place, think about pros and cons. That's what happens when we are in that window of tolerance. As stress drags on and we remain in that space, then our thinking deteriorates, it degrades. We move into the limbic system part of the brain where we might do more concrete or emotional thinking. In that place, you might be in this stress that you're in, you might find yourself crying more, just being very emotional as you encounter something that maybe in your class and you're trying to get into Canvas and you haven't been doing Canvas before, you're trying to get into an assignment and it's not working and you cry. Or in the next one, you might become more reactive. You might become angry. That's kind of more that fight or flight one that we saw. Might become frustrated. You might yell at your computer, yell at your teacher. That teacher doesn't know how to teach. You might become very reactive that way. And then it degrades even further, deteriorates even further, where you might just shut down and you might even be tempted to quit school, to say, forget it, I can't do this. We don't want you to get to that spot, which is why we're doing this webinar, is to help you build those resiliency skills. The next slide is just another way of looking at that. So on the next slide, we can see it's another way to organize what we were talking about. So we're in that higher brain place. That's when we're doing our abstract thinking. That's when we can solve problems well. We can make connections with our instructor, with other students in the class, with material. We're able to make new connections when we're operating out of that higher level of our brain, the cerebral cortex, which is the most recently evolved part of the brain. When we go into that lower part of our brain, that's the most ancient part of our brain, it's really just about safety and security and survival. So, what happens when we are stuck in being activated, our stress response system is constantly activated, then there's a reduction in our ability to learn, and at least our optimal learning. We might not do the things we're supposed to do. Dereliction of responsibilities is how we've written it there. So it might be that you don't do that homework assignment that you know is due, or you don't do that reading. And it's poor decision making as well happens in that space too, where you decide to watch a Netflix series instead of watching that video that you're supposed to watch for class. So we want to try to help you to get out of there. Amit, do you want to get in there?
Oh, sure. And I think it's important that we're not making the body's stress response system out to be the bad guy. It's our protection system. It's our survival system, and it helps us survive. It helps us protect us from real danger. But it becomes strengthened, and we'll talk a little bit about that later on. But we strengthen it in moments that we don't need it to be activated. We're not really in danger. We may think we are, and it's activating those systems. But the problem is with that chronic activation, and it's quite interesting when we look at some of the research from Bruce Perry. He actually shows in some of his research, as this chronic activation goes and we start entering into this subcortical regions of the brain, or the lower parts of the brain, IQ starts to decline as well. So it's not, the good thing, it's not permanent. Don't worry about it. I'm like, oh, great, my IQ is now low. We can then practice some of the skills that we'll teach you today and start regaining access to the higher parts of the brain. But when we're in the lower parts of the brain, it's not, as Dr. Bryzik mentioned, we're not in a state where we're optimizing our learning. We can't utilize abstract thinking, reflective thinking, problem solving. But as we talk about the hyper and hypoarousal systems of the body, understand too, even in the hypoarousal, as we're zoning off, watching series of Netflix because we're shutting down, that is also a protective mechanism of the body. When our body perceives that we can't fight or we can't flee from the danger, the body activates the shutdown system to numb ourselves from the situation. We dissociate from emotion. So in a state of emotion, we're feeling, I don't understand this homework assignment. I'm overwhelmed. I don't get it. It's frustrating. Nobody can help me. So the reaching out and connecting would be the higher part of the brain. But we start entering into the limbic system, the dicephalon system, where instead we're reactive and we're trying to fight it or flee from it. But if that doesn't work and the body says, well, not even fighting it or fleeing from it, sending an email to the instructor saying, why do we have to do this? And the instructor says, well, this is part of your homework assignment and it's part of your main grade. If that doesn't work, then we shut down, we just start to dissociate. And we can see that when we're zoning out hours on YouTube instead of doing our homework assignments, which then becomes a self-sabotaging behavior because reality kicks in and then we realize we're failing our class. So you can see the potential dangers if we don't attend to this stress activating system.
I'm so glad that you brought that up too. It is our friend. The way that we respond to stress is meant to help us survive because like we said at the beginning, that we're about survival. And so when we do those things, it's simply protective. But we want to help you find other ways to protect yourself too. So the next slide then is what we're in the midst of today, the COVID-19 pandemic. So there's a stressor that we're all living with, that we're all are encountering. And we have choices about how we respond to that. We can respond reactively with more of that fight or flight response, or we can try to stick within that window of tolerance area and start building resiliency. The outcomes are going to be different depending on what choices we make as well. So if we respond from that stress activated place, then we become more vulnerable. We become more vulnerable physically, emotionally. But if we're able to respond from that place of resilience in that window of tolerance, then that's what leads to more healthy body and mind, and the body and mind being able to connect in a more healthy way. So with that, let's go to the next slide. And this is a question that we want to pose to you is how can we take this distressing situation of the COVID-19 pandemic and create a potential resilience building opportunity? Is that possible? You can probably guess what our answer is, what our belief is with that. But we inserted here the Chinese word for crisis is actually two different symbols. We're in a bit of a crisis in our world. Perhaps some of you in your immediate lives are in a crisis. And according to these symbols, it's crisis is danger plus opportunity. So there's some danger, but we have many opportunities because of that. And Dr. Aubrey is going to lead us through these next slides, telling us what those opportunities might be.
Thank you, Dr. Bryzak. And so let's consider, let's talk about, this is really the heart and soul of resiliency. It is really, how do we start building the ability to self-regulate? And particularly, it's not just, well, yeah, and this is important. I teach my class, I want you to go home and I want you to practice deep relaxation. But how do we learn to self-regulate in the moment that we're experiencing in real time? And we'll talk about the power of doing that in real time, more than so than the best analogy that I can describe on how it just enhances the potential of building psychological and emotional resiliency. If anybody's trained their dog or their puppy to use a puppy pad, if I were to, if my dog, who's actually, his name is Fluffy, if Fluffy were to use the puppy pad as I expected, and I give him a treat immediately, I reinforce that behavior. But if Fluffy were then to use the puppy pad and I decide, you know what, I'm hungry and I make myself a sandwich, and an hour later come back and give Fluffy a treat, it's going to be hard to reinforce that connection between, oh, I get a treat when I appropriately use the puppy pad. And so similarly, we're gonna talk about how do we enhance self-regulation and resiliency by using self-soothing skills in the moment, so we can enhance those skills. And I'll talk briefly about it, not into great depth, briefly what happens in the body when we're doing that reinforcement. So the truth be told, there are many forms of self-regulation. By all means, I'm not going to sit here and say that the self-regulation skills that we teach are the best. There is no best. And in fact, I've been asked by many students, what's the best self-regulation skills? And sometimes, what's the best meditation skill? And my response is always the same, the one that you'll use. Because I can give you a skill, but if you don't apply it in your life, then it's worthless. It becomes useless as a skill, and it can be the most effective. And I've mentioned this even with doctors, what's the best medication? The one that you use. Because if you prescribe a medication, you don't support them in taking the medication, how effective will that medication be? And it's the same thing with self-regulation. So you can see a list here. I'm not going to go into great depth. We'll talk about in the end, because we do have a course that goes into depth about deep relaxation skills, because I think those are important. But I try to focus, and I'll give you a second to go through some of the, if you're writing down, taking notes. I think, and I believe, tell me wrong if I'm wrong, George, this slide is available to everyone. So don't worry if you don't catch everything here.
Yes, the slide will be available.
Perfect. So the slide is available, so you don't have to write down every single word on the slide. So those are some of the things that you can utilize to self-regulate. But before I get into teaching you one particular skill to self-regulate in the moment that you're stressed out, in the moment that you're experiencing a trigger. What I mean by trigger, I mean the event or situation that takes you out of your window of tolerance that Dr. Bryzek spoke about earlier. But let me turn my attention to you guys. Tell me what you use, what methods you use that have been effective methods of self-regulation or self-soothing. In other words, how do you relax your body? It may be some interesting feedback that I might not have considered, or some of those who are listening may want to utilize. So what is it that you use to relax your body? Don't be shy.
Okay, I was speaking and I forgot to unmute. I'm sorry. Some of the people have said they take a long shower or they do some deep breathing exercises.
I haven't heard the long shower. I heard the long bath. The long shower is a good one.
And just going back briefly about the fight or flight response that you asked earlier, some people have said that if they have too many things to do, they will freeze. Public speaking is a challenge in their life also. Something that stresses them out is math class. They find it hard to concentrate and do their homework because there are distractions at home.
Those are amazing ones. Those are good ones. I mean, it is, and it's really, and being compassionate with those that have mentioned that those are some of my triggers that get me out of that window of tolerance and into one area or the other. Because what may be stressful for me may not be stressful for you.
Right.
And everybody has a different window of tolerance.
Similar responses that have come in. I read a novel. They go to sleep. They listen to music. They go for a walk, or sometimes they eat. They participate in yoga.
I saw somebody that plays with their dog.
Somebody else said, I like the way the rain feels.
Oh,
or a long massage pad to lay on.
So it sounds like we can just end this webinar because you guys have the skills to self-regulate. Joking. So you guys have amazing skills, and by all means, I want you to continue those skills and continue practicing those skills, because the more you practice those skills, we still have some comments coming in, but the more we practice those skills, we start building our resiliency, both our psychological resilience and our emotional resiliency, to stay within the window of tolerance as we encounter, whether it may be setbacks in life, whether it may maybe be adversity. We start building our tolerance and our resiliency to walk through these situations, to, as Tupac mentioned in his poem, to flourish, to grow as a rose in these situations. So continue building or practicing these skills. But I like to discuss one particular skill, and I'll mention why. This is only one of many skills that we teach, and would have dubbed this or called this as acute regulation. This is just one of many acute regulation skills that we teach. And basically in this skill, what we call is the body scan. My good colleague, Dr. Gentry, calls it the wet noodle. And it's a simple skill. We can scan our body, and we can do that head to toe or toe to head. It doesn't really matter, whatever works best for you. And it only takes a matter of a couple of seconds to scan your body. So I'd like you to do that now. I'd like you to do, and you can close your eyes if you like, but the cool thing with this exercise is you don't have to close your eyes. It's not as intrusive as some of the deep relaxation skills. And all I'd like you to do is just take a notice and be present in the moment with your body, and just notice any tensed muscles that you may have. Like I said, you can start from your head. Notice any tension in the facial muscles, and just loosen those muscles. Relax them. You're the one squeezing those muscles, so you can unsqueeze those muscles. And continue going down your body. You go to your neck, your shoulders. Notice any tension. Just release that tension. Dropping the shoulders as you relax the muscles in the shoulders and the chest, the abdomen. The pelvis area is a particularly important area to focus on, because it's one area where the vagus nerve runs through. It's one of the only areas, if you learn to relax the entire pelvis area, you'll have a systemic relaxation of the body. So notice relaxing the posterior and the frontal areas of that pelvis, of your pelvis area. If you can relax it enough, you'll notice that even your shoulders start to relax. Lamaze therapy utilizes that technique of relaxing that area for those that are taking some of the skills during pregnancy. And then going down to the thighs, shin, and ankles and feet, and noticing every single tensed muscle and just loosening them. And of course, that took a little bit more than 5 seconds because I was walking you through that exercise. But you can do this exercise, like I said, with your eyes open in a matter of 5 seconds. It's not deep relaxation, but it's enough relaxation to activate a relaxation response of the body. And what we're doing when we're activating a relaxation response of the body, in behavioral science, we call this bottom-up regulation. We're using our body to regulate our mind and our brain. So if I can relax my body, relax the muscles, what happens in the body is the autonomic nervous system becomes relaxed. The parasympathetic nervous system becomes activated. And it can only do that when I'm in a state of safety. If I'm not feeling safe, my body tenses up. And that tension of the body is to protect myself. I need to tighten my fist to fight somebody off. But I can relax when I'm in a state where I don't need to fight, I don't need to flight, I don't need to freeze. I can relax my body, regain access to the neocortical parts of my brain, and as Dr. Bryzik mentioned, then I can gain access to optimal learning in class. But I can only do this in a state of sense of safety. So basically what we're doing to our body is we're tricking our body that we're in a state of safety by relaxing our body so it can activate the parasympathetic nervous system. And we want to do this, and this is the key element of self-regulation. Not only practice this hours after being, as Dr. Bryzik said, one of the classical scenarios of that fight or flight response is that you're stuck in traffic. You don't want to just practice it after you're done, after you, gotten home. And yes, you do want to practice it there, but you also want to practice it in that precise moment. Because it's in that moment when we're stuck in traffic, it's in that moment when we have an important exam. Earlier someone mentioned nursing. It's in that moment when we have this intense exam, this important exam, and our body starts to tense up because we're perceiving this as danger. If I fail this exam, what's going to happen in my life? What am I going to do with my life? Where am I going to work? All these things in the back burner is happening, and we're perceiving danger in our life. And our body starts reacting as that to protect ourselves. But what's happening is we're strengthening, because that activation of that fight or flight response is known as the sympathetic nervous system. And as we encounter that trigger, whether it's that quiz, that exam, or just thinking about passing an exam to get into nursing school that's triggering us, we start strengthening that neural paths, that neural system, that neural system between the sympathetic nervous system and that trigger. Trigger happens, sympathetic nervous system activates, muscles tense up. Trigger happens, sympathetic nervous system, and if we recall, in some of our classes, what fires together, wires together, that system becomes strong. It strengthens. And we've all experienced this. If you've ever experienced a moment in your life where your tolerance is just low, everything seems to stress you out. It didn't happen overnight. It slowly builds up to the point that our tolerance starts to decline. And that's the strengthening of that pathway from the sympathetic nervous system. And what we're doing is we're doing the opposite. We encounter a trigger, the test, or it may be in a good scenario for students. My mom will turn to me and ask me, "Did you do your homework today?" And what happens when our mom or our dad ask us, "Did you do our homework today?" Do we turn to our mom or dad and say, "Thank you, Mom. You don't have to care for us. You have a lot of things going on in your life, and yet you still take the moment to remind me of the importance of doing my homework assignment." And for that, I sincerely, wholeheartedly appreciate your love from me. If there's any moms in the audience, you'll probably say, "Well, that doesn't happen in my house." But that's because in that moment, we perceive it as danger. And our body reacts and we enter into this fight or flee response. That's why I mentioned earlier, we don't have good mental health, relationships become an upward battle to manage. Because we need good mental health and a self-regulation component. We can be taught all the communication skills in the world. But if we don't have good mental health, we can't apply those communication skills when we need them. So it's in that moment of opportunity, and that's what we're going back to what Dr. Bryzik mentioned. Can we take in a moment of opportunity, a moment of crisis, and utilize it to our advantage? And the answer is yes, because this is in a moment that we can start practicing self-regulation. And instead of we having a crisis situation or we have these triggers going on, watching the news, watching the media, and now we're triggered emotionally, So then our sympathetic nervous system is activated, and we continue doing this, and we're strengthening that system. What we're asking you to do is practice the opposite. As we're watching the media, we're relaxing our bodies and we're activating the parasympathetic nervous system. And guess what? Here's what's going to happen. Any triggers in the past, they start to become less activating. You start to dissociate, desensitize from those triggers. Is this really what happens? Let me give you one experience of one of my BHS students who actually took her BHS 150, which has it's a college, we implemented college success curriculum into that with the resiliency. And so she's currently taking the class, and she had mentioned, and this is not the first time that this happened. I have another example of somebody who took BHS 155 and was using the same skills to do this, but she had failed her math class. And what happens is she enters a state of hypoarousal. When she gets a quiz in class, she freezes. And she says she winds up by the end of the class period submitting a test with only 1 or 2 answers, if that. Sometimes she submits a quiz with nothing. So she fails her class because of that. When it comes to the final exam, her mind goes blank. And she's not able through the entire class to even answer some of the simple questions, which after the quiz, she takes a look at and she's like, I could have answered that. And so what I've asked her to do is to practice sorry, I got distracted. I saw some comments. Thank you. Continue mentioning the comments. George will mention them in a bit. But I asked her to go ahead and every time you go into class, do the body scan. Relax your body, because when you're in class, my guess is, and she said that's the case, you have tense muscles. So which means that your body's being triggered. You're fighting a potential threat that you're perceiving in the environment. So that's what she did. Every single day she had classes on, she has actually this one in the past that did that, she had classes on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and the one currently, well, she had classes on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Now she's going online. But every day in class, she was regulating, doing the self-regulation of relaxing the body throughout the entire class. Now, a couple of sessions of doing that during the class, didn't do much. She came back and reported, well, I'm still tensed during class. And I can tell her continue doing that. Well, guess what? She had a recent quiz before everything occurred with the COVID-19. And she came back and reported, I was able to get through the quiz and answer most of the questions. So she started desensitizing from that trigger of quizzes by practicing. It didn't happen overnight, because what we're doing is rewriting the wiring in the or restructuring the wiring in the brain, and that takes some time. But it was through a simple technique. So please, I employ. Don't set this aside as this is a simple technique. It's a powerful skill. It's a skill that many psychotherapists use with individuals that have fear of heights. Now, the caveat is I'm not going to ask you, and please, I emphasize, don't go out and pick some triggers that are that get you highly reactive, because like training, for example, if you want to run long distance, I'm not going to ask you to run if you never ran 5 miles. And you don't want to do the same thing, because I don't want you to feel the pain while you're doing this. And that could be painful if we're picking these traumatic incidents that happened to us in the past and try to desensitize to that. And you shouldn't be doing that without the help of a counselor anyway. So, but select some mild stressors. Maybe, well, I want to say getting stuck in traffic, but traffic is a little bit better now. But select some situations that get you upset. It may be every time my mom asks me or my dad asks me, did you finish up your homework? Or they ask me, Or, as a husband, it may be the wife asking you, did you have a healthy meal today? Did you eat healthy? Did you exercise? And we get upset with that. So practice on those mild triggers and continue practicing that, because you're activating the parasympathetic nervous system paired with that triggers, and eventually you start to desensitize and you'll notice a different response. You'll notice the response of what Dr. Bryzek was mentioning. You regain access to the neocortical parts of the brain, and now you can have good relationships. You can have a healthy connection with individuals, a healthy conversation. You regain access in the neocortical parts of the brain, and now I can learn in class because my brain is deviating energy back to the higher parts of the brain instead of having all the neurocortical activity in the parts of the brain that is required for survival. And guess what? It's not only an effective tool to heal from some of our triggers and to build our resiliency and to build our window of tolerance, but it's also an effective tool to prevent traumatic stress. See, now with COVID-19 occurring, you're probably watching the media, watching the news, and because of that, we're experiencing the levels of increased traumatic stress in our body occurring. And what's occurring is what Dr. Bryzek spoke about earlier. Hard for us to focus in class. How can we focus in class if we're concerned about what's going to happen in our future? So how can we learn? So what I'm going to encourage you moving forth to do is to build your resiliency. For example, when you're watching the media, make sure you're doing a body scan and relaxing your body to build that resiliency, because what will happen is if you don't do this, your sympathetic nervous system becomes activated because it's perceiving danger. And what happens is that it enhances learning. So our nervous system registers this event as I need to learn this immediately so that I can protect myself. So in a future context, when we're in a context that's very similar to this situation, our body becomes reactive so we can protect ourselves. We don't want that happening. So to prevent that from happening, we want to use bottom-up regulation, regulate through our body, relax as we're watching the media, as we're listening to some of these stories. It's the same skills I teach psychotherapists to do as they're listening to these traumatic stories, because if you don't do that, you're going to internalize their story and you're going to become reactive in your personal life. And that lowers your resiliency skills and your ability to become successful in life. So what I'd like to do now is hand it over to Dr. Bryzek, because I talked about how can we self-regulate. Now I'd like Dr. Bryzek to then show us how to utilize our connections and support to help us self-regulate.
Great, thank you. And we call that social regulation. So we'll move on to the next slide. And we'd like to invite you to write into the chat, what are some of your support networks, some of your support systems? We're going to look at outside of yourself now and the ways that you connect with other people. We have friends
One
up
response
there.
came in. It says family,
Okay, great.
husband and friends, co-workers, church and family.
Great. I just saw classmates
Yes,
too.
classmates Zooming.
We'd like to think that instructors could be part of your support system too. And if you're having any trouble, though it looks like we're getting quite a bit, but if you're having some trouble thinking about right now who's in your support system, now that we're in this kind of new normal, think pre-COVID-19 and other supports that you had at that time.
Or we got someone that says instructors.
Oh, good. Good.
Club members, I guess they said if they belong to a club, some of those club members can be their support system. Neighbors can be a good support system. Relatives, a boss, coworker.
Wonderful. So we've got quite a bit we can choose from. A lot of you came up with some, and as Dr. Aubrey said with the self-regulation, we want you to keep using those. We want to talk a little bit about, on this next slide, want to talk about how you can, what's the best way to create that social support system. And what we want that to be is, we do this because connection and support builds resilience. And that connection isn't just any kind of connection. It needs to be a connection where you feel safe. As Dr. Aubrey's been saying, that safety is key. If we don't feel safe, then we're in that lower parts of the brain about survival. When we feel safe, we can get to the higher parts of our brain. So we want you to be able to create kind of sanctuaries, communities of support. Maybe people with whom you have a good vibe, that you share a good vibe. And if you find somebody like that, you might even want to invite them to be part of your support system and work that out together. Consider your own personality too and what you find supportive. What Dr. Aubrey found supportive in his community might not be the same thing that I find supportive. So think about your own personality and build the support that works for you. For me, I'll give you an example. For me, in July of 2018, I was diagnosed with cancer, and it came as a shock. I didn't expect that, even though both of my sisters have had the same kind of cancer. I was always thought of as the healthy one because I eat well and I exercise and I regulate my emotions pretty well. So when I got that diagnosis, I was startled, surprised, and knew I needed to figure out how I could best manage that kind of crisis. What opportunities did I have in that crisis? And since I've been 10 years old, I've been keeping a diary. And that has just progressed into a journal as I've gotten older. And I considered ways to find a support system for myself during that time of my life. I thought about joining a support group. As George mentioned in the introduction, I used to work at the cancer support community where we offered free support groups to people. And because I was so close to that, I decided I didn't necessarily want to join an in-person support group. I wasn't sure if I could make the commitment of going once a week. There's another platform that I knew about called Caring Bridge, which is a blog. People that are dealing with some kind of illness or situation, acute situation, can get in there and journal, tell people how they're doing. You can open that up to readers with an invitation. And for me, that was the way that I chose to create my own sanctuary, my community of support. And I used that to share my story, to share the trauma that I was experiencing. And it was a very healing, engagement for me. I am more on the introverted side, so I like to write things out before I speak things. And sometimes I prefer to just write, or I prefer to be in smaller groups of people. And so that allowed me to feel connected to folks, but to feel connected in a way that worked for me, because I would spend an hour or so writing an entry, sometimes a couple of hours, writing an entry until I got it just the way I wanted it, post it, and then I would get lots of feedback from folks. And that was the support. I would get affirming comments, people that appreciated what I had to say because it made a difference in their lives or in somebody else that they knew and loved. I have a friend going through a similar procedure that I went through who said that was so helpful for her to read about my procedure because things got worse before they got better for me. And that support system really worked. So find what works for you and coach others in the way that they can be most supportive to you. I liked that system because I didn't have people calling me all the time and checking in. They were able to check on Caring Bridge. So sometimes you have to Well, actually, I wanted to tell you about a support system that you might want to use too as students. Dr. Summer Cheerland over at South Mountain Community College has created a blog, Teaching and Learning in the COVID-19 Era. So you might have seen emails about that. If you think that you like to write and that's a way of you gaining support, I encourage you to check that out. You can add to it if you want, or you can just read others' posts. So that might be a way. In the BHS program, Dr. Aubrey, in the Behavioral Health Sciences program, Dr. Aubrey makes available to his students there mental health first aid. And part of what he likes to say, what I've heard him say about that, is that it gives students a license to care about each other. So that might be another way um, to engage in some support. Do some training for yourself and then get involved in it that way. We want people to be in the emotional space that they need to be in to be able to support us. So again, we might have to train people on how to do that, because you want them to be emotionally regulated in order to give you the support that you need to be able to regulate your stress as well. An example might be in my marriage. In my household, there is my husband and me and our dog Peaches. And Phil and I have learned how to support each other in a way that's useful. Your household might be different. You might live alone, you might have a big family. But what we've done is I've let Phil know, okay, I want you to just listen. Don't solve this problem for me, but just listen. Or there are times when I might need help solving a problem. And I'll say, okay, I'd love for your input on this. What do you think I should do in this situation? But he can't read my mind on that. I've needed to give him that information about what do I need from you right now. So we encourage you with your social, as you're developing your community of support and using social support to help regulate your stress, to create the system that works for you, to listen to your own self, your body, what you need, and then to train the people to help them give you what you need. I'm going to move to the next slide. So we invite you now, in this reality that we're in right now, this COVID-19 reality, we probably need to be a little bit more creative about how we're developing, or even perhaps recreating our support system. Video chat, phone, texting. Someone had talked about Zoom before. This way of delivering this webinar isn't something that I would have done before. So we're finding new ways to be able to check in with each other, to connect with each other. As students, please connect with your faculty through Canvas. I think most faculty are using Canvas. So connect with them in that way. Even if they haven't asked a question, just say, hi, I'm here. Let them know that you're there. Build those connections. We like that. We're not bothered by your reaching out to us. We want that. So please do that. Connect with instructors, connect with other students in the class. Maybe somebody you used to sit next to before, and now you're not seeing them face to face anymore, but you might connect with them through Canvas, through the people link on Canvas. You can find their name and email them that way. I have a friend that lives in Massachusetts, and what they've done there, they've gotten creative about how to stay connected with each other. They were on a lockdown early on in this pandemic, and there was somebody that came up with this idea of creating a convoy to express gratitude to the first responders and healthcare workers. So people were told, okay, at this time, get in your cars, make signs first, get in your cars, and we're going to go around to fire departments, and we're going to go around to the hospital. We're going to flash our signs of expressing gratitude and encouragement for the folks that are out there working to help keep us safe. As my husband and Peaches and I have been walking the neighborhood, we see a lot of people that have written on their sidewalks, thank you, way to go, we're getting through this together. So people are out there in colored chalk on their driveways, where they've written. So that's one way that people have gotten creative in building some support. find your own creativity, see how you might be able to do that. We're built to be social beings. Um, so we need to create some way of being social while we are still physically distanced, but being socially connected. Dr. Aubrey, did you have something to add? I thought I might have heard something from you.
Oh, no,
No.
but exactly. I mean, banking on what you had mentioned, the body is really, that is how the body builds. We have a built-in mechanism to connect to others, and that's how we heal and grow. And so this is the challenging part right now with COVID-19, is because how do we continue utilizing our innate resiliency skills, such as the social regulation, to help build a sense of safety? How do I heal from all the stress? Because how the body heals, one of the ways the body heals from stress is to talk about it with our loved ones, with someone who understands us and can be compassionate with us. And that becomes challenging now because we have to be creative in how we're doing that. If you think about it, it's not just humans, but all animals are built with that nervous system to connect. And they utilize that nervous system to sense safety, even within relationships. Think about when you take your dog to the dog park and another dog comes and bites him in the rear, slightly. So if you'll notice, what will happen is your dog will turn and look at the facial expressions of your dog to see if, are you playing with me, or should I then react because you're actually trying to fight me? And that's the same thing as humans we do. Someone sends a text, and this is why there's a lot of confusion with emails and texts, because we don't see those cues that our nervous system needs to pick up to see, was that a joke? Or are you being serious? But we're going to have to be creative during this time, and we're going to need to self-regulate during this time when we're seeing text and we're not quite sure. Was my instructor, trying to be mean with that email, or were they trying to be helpful? We're going to need to learn how to go back to the self-regulation, regulate our body, so we can gain access to our neocortical parts of brain, and then reach out to the instructor. I'm a little confused with your comment. So that way we can continue building that social regulation, continuing having that connection with our instructor. So we're gonna, and it may be reaching out to your instructor. If you see emails and it seems a little confusing, you may need to reach out to your instructor. Can we have a video chat? Because it's important for me to see some facial expressions to understand what you're trying to say to me. And I'm sure some of the instructors will accommodate that if that's what you need.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I have been videoing with my students, calling them, and it's so helpful to be able to have that real-time conversation. I was teaching online anyways, so we weren't really impacted by any of these changes, but it just feels like a more stressful environment. So I've been reaching out to students in that way, making myself as available to them as I can, and I'm so grateful when they write to me and say, "Gosh, Professor Bryzak, I've having to work extra hours because my other family members aren't able to work, so I need to work in order to help support the family. So I can't get this assignment in right now. Is there any options that I have?" So please reach out. I wouldn't know about that situation if the student hadn't reached out to me. So that's the only way we know, is when you let us know. On the next slide, our last one of social regulation, just shows how important it is to add those things together, the people, and to maintain that relaxation in your body, as Dr. Aubrey was saying, while we're socially regulating, because that can lead to resolution of the stress, trauma that is created, and it can lead to sustained resiliency, something that we can continue to build on and carry into our future. We want it more than just right now. We want this to be carried into the future as well. So the next slide, we're just going to give you a little teaser. We've talked about two specific responses or two specific things that you might use to help build resiliency. And another one that's a third one that we're just going to mention a little bit because we couldn't help ourselves. We wanted to give you more. So it's this refueling, how to refuel our depleted resources, because in the midst of this, we can get worn down and we have fewer resources to be able to respond because we just have fewer outlets, fewer ways to connect. So it's really, really important to make sure that the basic tool that we're working with, our body, is healthy. So if we look at the next slide, we'll look at how to keep that body healthy with healthy eating. There's lots on the internet right now with people experimenting with different recipes, and I've had people sending me those email chains where share one of your favorite recipes with folks. So there's ways to do some of that research now on healthy eating, healthy activity, perhaps walking with your dog, or if you can't get outside, maybe you watch YouTube videos. There's lots of even short YouTube videos that you might watch on different kinds of exercise, including yoga. On our campus at GCC, we've had guided mindfulness meditation 4 days a week for the past 3, 4, maybe even 5 years. And we've been able to move that into the remote environment as well. So that's still happening 4 days a week, this remote mindfulness meditation. There's remote exercise classes that are being offered as well. So find ways to do that. Search it out, ask companions, ask instructors, write to George who's hosting this, or write to Dr. Aubrey or me, and we'll be happy to share with you what we know. We have other resources that were attached to the webinar invitation too. So allow yourself to be creative in here with sleep, and be gentle with yourself. It's really important to be gentle with yourself at this time. That tool, that basic tool that you've got, your body, is important to be treated well so that it will continue to allow you to do all the things that you're trying to do. That's what I have, and then I think I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Aubrey in case he wants to add to this, and then he's going to wrap us up with what other resources we have available for you.
Now I'm going back a little bit to self-care and revitalization.
Great.
It is so essential. In a bit, I'll talk about the 6-point resiliency system that we train students in. But the sixth element is self-care and revitalization. And it's interesting because even counselors get confused about what self-care is. But self-care really is doing the things that, a lot of times we don't want to do. But in the back end, doing that helps us refuel our depleted resources because, as Dr. Bryzek had mentioned, when we're in a state of perceiving potential danger, whatever that case may be, it may be we're perceiving potential danger because we think we're going to fail our class, or because right now of chronic ongoing resources that are being utilized to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic. As these resources, when I say resources, I'm talking about the biological, physical resources for your body to protect itself. As you continue using that, it becomes depleted. And unless we refuel ourselves, then we get burned out. And for those that are working in or planning, such as I did hear one comment, nursing, planning to go into healthcare, then they develop compassion fatigue, and it's hard for them to care for others. So we want to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves, the self-care and revitalization. So we're replenishing those resources that we've utilized, because the fact is, if you ask me, can I get rid of stress? No, that's part of life. Your body deals with that. Your body has the resources, but if you don't replace, revitalize, replenish those resources, then you burn out. So this is an essential ingredient in developing resiliency. It's a things, to be honest, that we don't want to do. Sometimes we don't want to come home after a stressful day and eat that salad. You know, and so hence is the reason why it's an entire system that we'll talk about in a bit, because you have to learn how to deal with stress, how to lower those levels of stress, because if you don't learn how to do that, you're not going to apply. You're not going to want to come home after a stressful day and eat a salad and then go to gym, or vice versa, the opposite way. Right? So we need to learn how to deal with what our bodies are reacting to, attend to the threats that we're experiencing in an environment, the stressors that we're experiencing in an environment, how to mitigate that so that the way we can come home and we can still have the energy. Well, not in this day and age right now, we can't go to the gym, but we can go to our home gym, as Dr. Bryzik had mentioned. We can look YouTube a couple of videos and an exercise at home, but we're not going to have the energy if we don't do all the required skills, the self-regulation skills, because we're not going to want to come home and then do that. So that I just wanted to emphasize that, because we'll get to, actually, let me go to that slide. This is the 6-point resiliency system, and they're all important. Because like I said, if I don't practice self-regulation throughout the entire day, then I'm expending a lot of resources, more resources than is needed, because my life is not in real danger. But I'm expending more resources because that's how my body's reacting to everyday stressors at work, at school, and in my home life. And because I'm expending those resources and I'm not regulating on an ongoing basis, when it gets to the end of self-care and revitalization, I don't have the energy to do the things that I need to refuel. I don't have the desire. I worked in trauma, crisis, and both in trauma for years. When I was on the crisis mobile team, and we were going to one case after another, talking about danger to self, danger to others, and there was times we didn't even have time to eat. Do you think I came home after a stressful day? At this time, I didn't have the skills of self-regulation. Do you think I came home desiring a salad after a stressful day? And so it's important, they go hand in hand, because if you don't practice one, it's hard to practice the other. That's why I emphasize, going back to the beginning of the conversation, the key cornerstone of health, even physical health, is mental health. Because if you don't have mental health, it's hard to apply physical health and become successful in all areas of your life. So this is the 6-point resiliency system that we offer. And this is what we're going to mention, where can I get some more information? Because we mentioned a couple of skills that you can apply during this time to, one, mitigate some of the anxiety caused by COVID-19, or even mitigate some of the anxiety caused by the fact that I was going in person. Now I have to go into an online environment to learn. But you can continue building your resiliency through this 6-point resiliency system. Self-regulation we talked about, but there's many more tools of self-regulation, because it may be that you just don't like the body scan, but we have many other tools to teach you that may fit your needs better. But the key point with the self-regulation is learning to turn down or tone down that defense system, because you're not feeling safe in your environment. So how do we get that sense of safety in the body so that I can then regulate my mind and my brain? And that really is the self-regulation component. The mental flexibility is really to change our perception, change how we view situations. So that way we don't perceive this situation as a threat or a danger that gets our body reactive and our nervous system reactive. And so we react differently to this situation. So how do we do that? And we train you in that area of mental flexibility, to see things from a different perspective. And because we're able to see and perceive things from a different perspective, we're able to react differently to that situation. Just quickly checking our time here, because I don't want to, I do want to give a little bit of time for us to ask some questions. So I won't touch more. I was going to give an example of mental flexibility, but maybe at a later webinar we'll talk into depth about what's possible. Motivation and self-direction, really teaching you how do you channel the energy of motivation, motivating yourself, whether it's in class, and then how do we become self-directed? How do we become more intentional in our behaviors, as well as the positive psychological strengths? How do you use your strengths and your internal strengths as well? This is really built off of positive psychology that really helps us build our resiliency. The regulation, Dr. Bryzek did an amazing job in explaining how we're utilizing that interpersonal connection support through relationships. And then we touched on self-care and revitalization. So where do we find this material? Well, one, GCC and BHS 150 added curriculum.
Is that Fluffy?
No,
Is that
that's my dog. I don't know.
Okay, somebody's dog. Sorry about that.
So, so BHS 150 has an element of college success, the academic resiliency curriculum. It has the entire curriculum where you learn all the 6-point resiliency system. BHS 155 has the 6-point resiliency system, but it's tailored towards professionals, those that are in nursing profession, those that are in, I go out and I train police officers. Right now I'm working with AZ Post. We're trying to develop a resiliency curriculum for all police officers in the state of Arizona. And it's using the same resiliency skills that we're training students to become resilient in school. Now, CPD 150 is in process to implement the resiliency curriculum. However, we do have some pilot courses that are going on, and you can reach out to Dr. Bryzek, because Dr. Bryzek is actually teaching CPD 150 with the full academic resiliency curriculum embedded into that. So reach out to her, reach out to myself, and I believe you can even download a flyer to tell you which actual CPD 150 has a resiliency component embedded into the course. We have additional classes. Like I mentioned, the CPD 150. This PowerPoint will be available. You can click on there. It'll take you to find a class to show you what all the classes that are embedded with the academic resiliency for summer, for fall, for CPD 150, all the classes that have the resiliency, click on there and it'll take you to the exact class. You can enroll in that class with a resiliency component. But it's also offered at South Mountain Community College. The academic resiliency is not being offered at South Mountain yet, but the professional resiliency is being offered in BHS 155. And once again, you can, if you're at South Mountain or closer to South Mountain, you can click on that link there for the summer class or the fall class, and it'll take you to find a class so you can know which classes to enroll in. So I want to go ahead, and we have about 12 minutes to open up any questions that you may have for Dr. Bryzek or myself. Don't hesitate. Please ask those questions. We can't learn if we don't ask those questions, and we don't know what you need to know for us to respond. So we'll go ahead and open that up, and Dr. Bryzek and ourselves will go ahead and wait for those questions, and we'll do our best to respond.
Okay. I have one question that says, what is the difference between tolerance and resiliency?
Amazing question. And so when you're looking at the tolerance, when we went to the tolerance, that's just a way of describing our ability to be resilient in particular situations. Resiliency, psychological and emotional resilience, is really just our ability to walk through, or our ability to overcome some of the past traumatic experiences or painful past experiences or current painful past experiences that we're encountering. That's really the resilience, and it's our bodies. Those are innate skills. Now, the tolerance would be really talking more about the triggers. So what is it? What is our level of tolerance? What are some things that get us to the point where it overwhelms our resiliency? And that would be the tolerance level. And that's the window of resiliency that Dr. Bryzak was mentioning. So it may be, for example, it may be if I were a student, my mom asking me, did you complete your homework assignments for this week? And my window of tolerance, it exceeds that window of tolerance because I can't deal with my mom asking me those questions because it feels like she's intruding in my personal life and impinging on my independence, or it's making me feel like I'm not good enough or I'm not smart enough to take care of my own life. So I perceive that comment as a threat. So it exceeds my window of tolerance and exceeds my, in many ways, how I'm describing it can be one of the same, but it exceeds my inner resources or my resiliency. And then I fall outside of that window and I become reactive because I'm hyper or hypo. I shut down and I just ignore my mom. Hopefully it explains it.
Okay, the next question I have here is, do you have any advice on what fruits or veggies are good if you need to get your energy up?
Ooh, I wish that I noticed that Louise So is one of our attendees. Love to have Louise be able to respond to that one. She might have some ideas. She's one of our fitness wellness faculty. But um, I don't know, Thomas, if you know that any better. But
And my suggestion is,
I would look online.
well, and I would be cautious on where to look online. I would go to government agencies
Mm-hmm.
and look at, and take a look at peer review articles to look, because there's so many, this is good for you, this is good for you, this is, and I think, at least in my book, The Resilient Learner, which is used for college success, I do a good job in just scouring the research of what are some peer review articles that show that this is effective. My focus more was not so much on building in the physical energy, but more on building the brain. So what are some really good fuel sources for learning and building and fueling your brain, so you can have the self-care and the revitalization of brain fuel. But my suggestion, and particularly because Dr. Bryzak and myself are not licensed nutritionists, we don't want to go outside of our scope of competence. So
And part of that, like Dr. Aubrey said before too, is just finding out what works well for you too. So, you'll read some things and there'll be a menu of things to choose from. Find the things that work well for you and then repeat.
absolutely. But
Okay.
there's so many resources and government agencies that will help you. I heard somebody.
The next question, it says, how can you integrate self-care when you are lacking resources such as time or money?
Well, and that is a very interesting question, because when I go out and I present to healthcare providers, um, I've always stated my example. I mean, when I went through graduate school and my doctorate, the only thing that we were taught was self-care for psychological resiliency, and it's not effective for healthcare, because the fact is, and I've experienced it in most individuals who've gone through healthcare, we're working sometimes double shifts. When I worked crisis mobile team, I was working 16-hour a day, and then I go home and my day's not over. It's sometimes, even as a therapist, because I have to put my notes in because they're required within 24 hours to have my case notes, my clinical notes in. So what I found in my experience is that as I practice self-regulation skills, it's amazing. It's amazing that we still have 24 hours in a day, but you tend to have more energy to do more things. Your resources, and this is including your mental resources, are allocated to being more resourceful and allocate it to be more creative with your time. And you tend, because of that, and it's the same thing, even when I teach time management to students, your traditional time management will just teach you how to chart things. But I found in my experience that it's ineffective because they don't really learn how to regulate themselves. And because of that, you can have this amazing calendar, but they don't follow through with the calendar and they're not being creative with how they use their time. But when we become self-regulated, then we have access to the neocortical parts of the brain and amazing things happens. And I wish I could explain to you what those, by science, what those things happen, but it's, you tend to have more time to do more things and you're more creative with using your time. Because like I said, the best way I can explain to you is that you have more access to the neocortical parts of the brain and you're more creative.
Right. And as Dr. Aubrey said, in the self-regulation, you could do the wet noodle in the 5 seconds or even take 30 seconds. So if you have small pieces of time where you do that, doesn't cost anything, and then see if you become more creative, if those creative juices are greater. And then I'd also encourage you to try experiments. Set up an experiment for yourself. I'm going to see what I can do that feels like it fuels me that costs nothing. Just as an experiment for a week. What can I do for a week that costs nothing, that fuels me? And try a couple of different things. And then at the end of the week, look at how those things worked and repeat the ones that work well for you.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. I have one here. It says, how do you feel about vision boards?
I think vision boards can be very useful. It's just having an image in front of you. If it's the same thing that I'm thinking of, I've had people do vision boards where you cut pictures out of magazines and you create an ideal of something that you're striving for. And images are very powerful. So if you have those images before you of the things that you are seeking, the things that you are wanting to move towards, that sets the body up to be able to make that its reality. So I think they can be helpful.
And I agree with Dr. Bryzik because when we look at teaching you the tools of becoming a resilient learner, one of the elements that we focus on is on the neuroscience. How does the brain learn? And we do know that the brain tends to understand better, internalize, and memorize images better than words. And so using that to your advantage and having that can be very motivating, but it's at the same time, it's understanding too, and this is going back to the previous question, it's understanding too that if you've ever had a situation where you're trying to brainstorm, you're trying to think about something, and just your creative juices are not working, your solution's not coming, and someone's told you, just sleep on it. And all of a sudden, you're in bed and you're relaxed, and all of a sudden, these ideas come up, that you didn't think about in the state that you were stressed out or anxious about. That's the self-regulation. We can have all these image boards, but if we don't self-regulate, we look at these image boards and the mind says, well, that's good, but I can't do that. So it's really important to combine that with all the resiliency skills that you're learning, is learning to self-regulate as we're seeing ourselves in this image so it becomes real to you. And then you have the creative juices flowing so that you can pick up creative ideas that you didn't realize prior to, or when you were in a state of anxiety because I'm feeling overwhelmed. There's a lot of things going on.
And that's actually good timing because we have no more questions and it is now coming up on 1:30. So thank you very much
Thank you.
for hosting, or not hosting, but presenting this webinar for us. And if there are no more questions, we will go ahead and end this webinar, and we will look forward
Thanks
to you
all.
joining us next week for the faculty.
Yeah, you might remind everybody about next week's webinar. So
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Next week's webinar will be for faculty to help their students in this stressful time of COVID-19. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. The recording will end now, and then within one 24-hour period, we will have the recording back from WebEx, and I will be able to post that along with the PowerPoint slide and your resources.
Great. Thank you
Okay.
so much, George.
Thank you very much.
So do we say adios now?
Yes, I'm gonna end the webinar and it'll disappear for everybody.
Okay. Okay. Thank
Thank you very
you.
much and have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.